Welcome to the Thriving Mayor Show, the weekly broadcast featuring former and current mayors who are thriving, sharing their story, insight, wisdom, and viewpoint. Join us and comment on social media as we meet another of the superheroes we elect to lead the rejuvenation of our towns and cities and who serve us all. Visit www.thrivingmayor.com to learn more. Here we go. Good morning, everyone. It's Michael Hubicki, the host of the Thriving Mayor Show. It's April 28th in 2021. And today I'm super excited to have as our special guest, Ian McCormack. Good morning, Ian. How are you today? I think Ian's internet is frozen. I'll go ahead and read the territorial acknowledgement, our honoring, and hopefully Ian's internet will unfreeze. We will begin this episode by honoring the Aboriginal land and the Indigenous peoples who've lived here from the beginning. As settlers, we're grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. Long before today, there have been Aboriginal peoples who have been the stewards of this place. In particular, we honor the ancestors of the land, the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe Chippewa peoples. This territory is covered by the Williams Treaty. Tatalia Michelle Nahani taught me about honoring our shared community with the land and people. Let's just see if Ian's been able to come back. He has not. I will read his bio and see if he shows up. Ian McCormack is the author of Who's Driving the Greater and Other Governance Questions. A great book. He loves what he does, sharing his wisdom and Ianisms. Ian lives in the space between appointed or elected officials and organizations managers. Since 2000, Ian has worked on governance and structural reviews, strategy development and implementation, and orientations or refreshers for boards of directors and elected officials. He has done this both as an employee of government and as a business advisor in the private sector, working for himself and others. As a nationally recognized certified management consultant, his areas of interest include local government, libraries, post-secondary education, health, nonprofit organizations, and community safety. Welcome back, Ian.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
No problem. All that you've missed was your bio, which you wrote, so that's not a super big deal. And an honoring of the land and the peoples from which the Thriving Mayor Show is broadcasting.
Right.
So everybody knows who you are, and now they can put a face to your story. So what happened?
My computer said it needs to restart and just promptly did that. I'm a little concerned it might do it again.
Yeah, you gotta love that technology. Okay, so just by way of introduction, the way that I obviously reading Ian's book here is how I got to know him, or at least his writings. But then in doing the research, I listened to a couple of podcasts that Ian did with Municipal World Shares, and then a video interview that he did with Resource X. And in the Resource X interview, I was telling Ian before the show, I really enjoyed his presentation style, that he has quite a dry sense of humor and will barely crack a smile. So hopefully we'll be able to get a couple of those out of you today, Ian.
Hopefully.
Yeah. So the title of, or the cover of your book and the title with the greater brings back a lot of awesome memories for me. I grew up, my dad was a county engineer in the county of Peterborough. And as a kid, I'd be out on job sites with him, and I was always intrigued with the grader. And he instilled in me a sense of awe with the grader and said, that's one of the hardest machines to operate because you have to know where you are and then pitch the blade a certain way and an angle. And so why a grader?
So it's more of a metaphor than it is really anything else. But when I was trying to go through titles of the book, somebody had suggested to me, don't actually come up with a title until you're partway or most of the way through writing, because you'll box yourself into it. So we had a few working titles we were working with. And when we tested it, everybody who was involved in local government had a really good understanding of what it meant, the metaphor behind it.
Yeah.
The only person who didn't really get it when I tested it was my mom. She said, well, who cares who's driving the grader? But what it came from was, and I'm sure other of your viewers have seen this, is an elected official who doesn't understand the role of governance versus the role of management or administration.
Oh, yeah.
So we had a rural municipality in north central Alberta. I was working with them, trying to get them on the right track after they'd kind of gone off track. A colleague and I were working with them. And one of the councillors had said, I should be driving the grader because I can do it better than the public works guy can. So it's a bit of a metaphor for understanding the role of governance versus understanding the role of management and administration and service delivery. And since the title of the book came out, lots of people have told me stories very similar to the one you just have, or stories similar to the one about, well, such and such an elected official tried to do something that they ought not to have done, and certainly wasn't covered by insurance, and certainly wasn't covered by workers' compensation. Probably trying to do a favor. Anyway, that's what it's all about.
So is the subtitle here, and other governance questions, is that there for your mom?
I hadn't considered that, but sure. I'm not convinced she's actually read the whole thing.
Well, tell her on Mother's Day.
It's coming up. Well, yeah, this is actually the first Mother's Day this book has been out. I worked on it through 2020, and it came out in, I think it was published in November, available in December. So it's only been out actually for a few months now.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I love it. And it's a great read. They're this chapter, and we'll get into it a little bit later. But for me personally, you can pick it up and read a couple of chapters and digest it really fast. And after each chapter, there's some questions or some thoughtful points to help drive it home, which is really awesome. Good. So another thing I just want to bring to your attention, Ian, is that you're our second guest on the Thriving Mayor Show who has been stranded for multiple days on an overnighter in Nunavut.
Really? Who else was stranded there?
Excuse me, the mayor of Igloolik, Merlin Racinos.
Oh, okay. Maybe we were together. So I was, so actually this precipitated the book. In November, I think it was November of 2019, I was hired by the Nunavut Association of Municipalities to do an orientation for all the newly elected mayors in Nunavut. Because there's just, almost all the communities are hamlets, fly in only. There are no roads in or out. We met in Rankin Inlet, which I think is the second largest municipality, maybe third, in Nunavut. And so they hired us.
People.
Yeah, I'd never been to the northwest coast of Hudson's Bay in November before. So I did the session one day, and actually one of the interesting things about the session, if you got a moment, was I had sent all my materials in advance, presentations, notes, that sort of thing. And I get there today, everything's set up just beautifully. I turn the projector on, I turn the computer on, I start up PowerPoint, and they've translated everything into Inuktitut. So now I'm looking at my slides. My Inuktitut's not so great.
No.
Probably equivalent to yours, I am suspecting. So I had no idea which slide I was on. But it was fascinating. So I did the session tag teamed with a woman by the name of Madeline Redfern, who until that election had been the mayor of Iqaluit. So she and I went back and forth, and it was done with simultaneous translation because the English skills of some of them were equal to my Inuktitut skills. Yeah. So, and then we worked our way through the day, had a good day working with them, went back to the hotel room, and then the blizzard hit. And in a fly-in, fly-out community, once the blizzard starts, the flights get canceled. Yeah. So the joke was we overnighted in Rankin for 5 days. Yeah. And during that time, I wasn't really going to go walk out on the land. It was minus mid-40s, I think, with and blowing sideways, and didn't know what I was going to do. So my assistant at the time sent me a list of what she called Ianisms, which are the chapter headings now. And we changed them to kind of governance concepts. And she said, here's your list, get writing. Because I'd been musing about writing a book for a while. So she challenged me to do that. It was what some people have subsequently called an enforced writer's retreat. Oh, cool. And I started writing and writing and writing. And I think after 2 or 3 days, I was at 12 or 15,000 words or something. And I wasn't sure at that point if anybody would want to read it or if it was just a catharsis that I was having. And then I posted that very comment on Twitter. And Susan Gardner, who's the editor of Municipal World, came back to me and essentially said, if you can get it up to 40,000 words, we'll publish it. So it was really serendipitous. And there we go, right? So now shout out to Municipal World for putting some faith in a first-time author. They've sold a few hundred copies from my understanding. And there we go, hey? And so that's the story of how the book got precipitated. And I mean, it's changed a lot over the time, but that's where it started. Rankin Inlet.
Rankin Inlet. And Mayor Racinos as well had his big aha moment for running for mayor happened on his overnight when he was stranded. I forget the community, but he was visiting a mine. And he'd been trying to weigh in his mind, should I run, should I not run, should I run and not run? And during that 3 or 4 days, it became clear to him that his calling was to run for mayor.
Neat.
And I think in the second last day of the nomination period, he called the people in Igloolik and said, I'd like to run. And they had to designate a person wherever he was as the election officer to take his nomination. And he won. So there you go. There's the moral of the story. Mayors and books, they're birthed on these long overnight.
Yeah, I was joking with somebody. So I'm starting to work on a second book, and some of these people were saying, well, I'm in Sherwood Park, just outside Edmonton. They're saying, instead of the writer's retreat being in Rankin Inlet, maybe you should go to Jasper Park Lodge and hang out there for a few days instead. Sounded okay to me. Yeah,
that's another really beautiful part of the country. Another funny thing with Merlin was the first time he went to Igloolik was in October, and he flew from Ottawa and he's wearing shorts and flip flops.
Mm-hmm.
The guy in the plane beside him says, "You've never been to Igloolik before, have you?" He goes, "No." "Why?" "Well, there's a blizzard." So he had to borrow the flight attendant's jacket to get from the plane to the airport terminal. It's funny. It's awesome people up there.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah. One of the funny parts of your Resource X interview was when the interviewer asked you about the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and the meaning that book has for you. And I think she asked for your favorite quote, and I really loved your answer to that. If you could share that with us. Sure.
So I think people, when they're interviewing authors, expect some sort of erudite answer, and I'm going to quote Shakespeare or Bronte or something like that. But no, I quoted Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy because it was relevant. So and people of my generation have read that through high school or whatever. Maybe you were the same. I don't know. But there's a point in there that says that anybody who wants to be president of the galaxy should be immediately excluded from contention to hold that post. And that's not an exact quote, but that's kind of the précis of it. And the idea behind that is, when I think about people who want to be mayors, or any elected official for that matter, I think there's a continuum that runs from public service all the way to self-service. And those who are in it for self-service reasons and just want to be the boss and tell me what to do probably aren't the most inspiring people.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas those people who've grown up in their communities, who have been involved in the Rotary Club or in church councils or, I don't know, whatever service clubs there might be, are involved in public service. And those are the types of people who naturally and organically grow up through serving their communities. And I think those are the types of people who make the best mayors.
Yeah, and I really like that section too. You can see I have it bookmarked here. It's another great section in the book too. And I love to think about processes as continuums. And there's that. It's like when we have conflicts, there's forced compliance or happiness at one end, and then there's personal conflict and almost hatred at the other. And in the middle, there's that balance point, that equilibrium. And the point is to find the equilibrium, because we do have to have a little bit of both. But really interesting concept.
Yeah.
Any other favorite quotes that they don't have to be erudite or anything, but just things that
I will when I use a lot, particularly because it speaks to groups of individuals. And there's a quote, and this one perhaps is more appropriate given the august nature of this conversation. It's from Benjamin Franklin. I think I put this one in the book too, and it says, "We must all hang together, or most assuredly we will all hang separately."
Oh,
And it speaks to the nature of local government being. I had a conversation with the mayor yesterday about the role of first among equals for mayors, and about his contention was we're not actually first among equals. There's a bit of nuance to that.
mhm.
But anyway, in terms of voting power or authority, for the most part in Canada, mayor's votes count the same as councillors' votes. So, and it could be a reeve or chief or whomever, whatever. But what it talks about is you can't use the strong mayor American style veto system in Canada. That we have to, you as a mayor still have to bring a majority of council together in order to make things proceed, or else the community suffers, and that's the hang separately part.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the book, Ian, there's really two sections. The first section are your Ianisms, and we'll talk about that first. And then the second part of the book is about leadership and local governance and obviously leaders. And can you share why did you decide on the two sections? And then we'll go right into the first section about the Ianisms.
So the real answer, I didn't have enough for a full book with every one section. The answer the unfortunate thing about this being live, of course, is you can't edit that out. So what had happened when my assistant had sent me those list of Ianisms, it was very similar to the list that is in the book right now in terms of the first section of it. And there's a little bit of a truism behind each one of these things, and perhaps we'll get to some of that. But after I'd started going through some of these concepts that I had started to think about, I got to thinking a bit more about how these are actually displayed in a whole person, particularly in someone who is provided with the authority by the people of a community to essentially usurp some of their own authority to provide good services and benefits. The good governance piece.
Right.
As I started moving into that good governance, I wanted to start thinking about defining it. And I looked around, I read some other authors about it too. And unlike the studies that have been done into provincial or state or national federal, there's not as much work that seems to have been done locally. So there's some nuance to what is considered to be good governance at a local level. And so that was the sort of the piece that I started thinking more and more about, and that got fleshed out into the entire second half of the book, which speaks to leadership, to the principles of good governance, the hierarchy of good governance, and I compare that to Maslow's hierarchy of needs and saying there are some bedrock principles in good governance, and then there's some nice to have. And if you look at what you would probably define as a thriving mayor, they're kind of further up that hierarchy of good governance principles.
Yeah. Perfect. So share with us, if you will, maybe two or three of your favorite Ianisms. And Ianisms, as Ian explained, turned into the chapters in the book. And there are, I think, 20, how many
22, 22.
22, yeah.
13 of which are governance concepts or Ianisms.
Right. Yeah. So maybe a couple.
Sure.
The one I really like is strategy. No strategy.
No strategy survives first contact with reality.
Right. Yeah.
I'll speak to that one, and I'll maybe pick another one too. So the idea behind no strategy means that any organization, whether it's a local government or a business, really has no idea what's going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah.
I mentioned, for example, that I'm in kind of central Alberta. We had no idea that the oil price was going to crash. Nobody had any idea about the floods that were going to have an impact kind of across the country, ice storms. Nobody really knew that coronavirus was coming along. But that doesn't let you abdicate your responsibility to do good planning. So that's the no strategy piece. A local government needs to come up with a strategy that makes it unique and looks at some distance into the future. I'm usually a proponent of, why don't we look a generation into the future? And I was doing the first part of a virtual strategic planning session with the city council in Melville, Saskatchewan yesterday. And we were talking about how far out should we be looking? And the determination was, if we pick a generation, we're looking far enough out that it's a bit of a stretch and it's truly strategic. But we're looking near enough that most of the people sitting around the table having the conversation will still be part of the community, or still can be part of the community at that time. So it's a nice to have. So they've set a vision for what success looks like, in this case for Melville, Saskatchewan, a generation out. And then if we start looking at developing a strategy to get from here to there, I mean, it's kind of like Carver. what's his name? Start with the end in mind. Anyway, speaking of the
show notes.
and I'll remember it momentarily, and everybody else is kicking me for not remembering it at the moment.
Yeah.
But anyway, if we have set a vision for that success and something small gets in the way, and I'm talking about coronavirus being small in the terms of 25 years or 30 years, hopefully it's small anyway, we still need to keep sight on the vision of that community, and we can still work towards it. We need to adapt here and now, but we can still look towards whatever it is that makes Melville, again in this case, unique, special, thriving, sustainable, that generation from now. So we know that the strategy we create is going to have to be adapted. We also know that we can't bind a future council, but it doesn't let us abdicate the responsibility of actually doing that planning.
Yeah. And I think another really key aspect that we all need to remember is that once, like after that day, that strategy doesn't go on a poster on the wall or at a booklet on the shelf. It's living, and we have to keep coming back to it and adapting to it, and as the people change, hopefully that provides that underlying theme that future politicians, elected officials are going to be able to follow. Yeah, super powerful.
Yeah. I think so. I like that one as well. You asked me for another one as well, and just looking through this, I'll pick another one that's called "It's Never About What It's About." I mentioned a while ago we sometimes do investigations into municipalities that aren't working properly for one reason or another, and in cases like that, we are often brought in to address something that has come out the end of a pipe. So really, it ends up being a symptom of something that probably has gone wrong last year, 5 years ago, 25 years ago, when two people had a fight out behind the bike racks in high school, and now they just carry it onto council.
Yeah.
And if we look at those symptoms and we only address the symptoms, when you take the Band-Aid off, it starts bleeding again. So we still have never really addressed what needs to be addressed. I had a colleague a few years ago whose metaphor was, got to peel back the onion until you find out what the real reason is. And it's almost never whatever it is that we happen to, whatever the fight is about at the moment that somebody has complained about somebody else about. And if we just address symptoms, we're not really getting any further ahead. So we have to almost do some sort of a systemic review of where we are as an organization, and then address those things. And that gets to the willingness of the collective group of council members to do that. And there's a lot of political capital that gets expended in doing something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Just wanted to ask you about Chapter 9 in light of COVID and the pandemic. And Chapter 9 is snacks drive engagement, or at least attendance. So how are you now recommending to councils and towns to get people back re-engaged again? Because we can't give them snacks.
Maybe we can give them inoculations. I don't know. Set up a vaccination clinic, and then
public open house on the official plan and vaccination center.
Yeah, exactly, something like that. Well, the idea behind that was we were saying that if you have an open house, the same 2 or 3 people are always going to show up. So communities are starting to think about, well, how do we get more people engaged? And I flippantly said at one point, my mayoral campaign is going to be, I'm going to triple everybody's property taxes, and that's it. And the whole idea is to get people to come out and vote. But what this is talking about, that's a joke, by the way. I'm not really going to do that. But then other places say, if somebody has to come in, we have to do some sort of a statutory engagement around the OCP or some other plan. Then if we put out coffee and donuts, that sometimes brings more people out.
Yeah.
Now, of course, virtual coffee and virtual donuts don't have the same sort of drive, obviously. Hopefully, fairly soon, we're able to get back to that way it was. And maybe we also have the ability to look at statutes as well and say, maybe the way the provinces and territories are actually making requirements of municipalities to engage physically isn't as important as it used to be. Maybe now we've been forced ahead 5 or 10 years through to use technology that we weren't really comfortable with a year ago. And maybe now it's an opportunity to maybe do a hybrid sort of a thing. There are those who will still be uncomfortable with technology, and we will have to adapt. We'll have to maintain that. But there are those who are very comfortable with technology. And as the tools themselves proceed, perhaps there's an opportunity to think more about how we engage with people. But if the individual, the citizen, the business, the organization doesn't see anything in it for them, that they don't see themselves having any efficacy in the decision that's already been made, it's not going to work anyway.
Yeah.
So we're putting another Band-Aid on it by snacks. What we're trying to do is convince people that they do have this efficacy, that they have an opinion that counts more than once every 4 years or 3 years in some situations.
Yeah, that's a great point. And there's so much misinformation, fake news out there now that some people just, it's hard for them to know what to trust. And if the municipality is providing that information, at least it's coming from a trusted source, and people can read it and react to it. So go ahead.
Even if you look at the North American context for local government too, there's such an overpowering media landscape south of the 49th border that I think a lot of people who are doing other things and aren't paying attention to local government in Canada think that our local government systems are very similar, and they're vastly different. Yeah. Not only are they're more homogeneous in the United States than they are here, because of the constitutional authority for municipalities being devolved to the provinces and territories here. So it's slightly different. For example, in the north, some places the mayor doesn't vote except in a tie. Mm-hmm. In some places, the mayor is a member of a voting member of boards and committees. In some places, the member is ex officio but not voting. So we have a real mishmash kind of across the country. So we can lose some of that. Some of the local flavor can be overshadowed by what we see in the media. I don't think that really helps us. So some of it's on the media, some of it's on the municipalities, but I think most of it ultimately is on the citizen.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I read or listened to one of your, I think it might have been on the podcast, about someone who's thinking about running for elected official, political office, and I think that this instance was a mayor. And what advice would you give somebody who's thinking about running for elected official?
I would. So we already talked about that continuum of self-service versus public service. I would ask them why. Do they really believe they have something unique to offer to the community and they're the best person for the job to do it? Are they just mad because nobody's dealing with the potholes in front of their house? That one issue candidate is a real problem, because actually, interestingly, we were doing some work with we were doing a bunch of orientations for council candidates too, even before nomination day, right, to kick the tires and help people determine whether they want the job or really want the job or not. And one of the people said that he was really interested in coming in and instituting term limits for local government officials in his community. We had to explain that you can't do that. That there's no constitutional authority for you to do that. You try it, you're going to get a constitutional challenge. So the level of understanding is not universal. And I think that that's going to lead to frustration, and if they get elected, potentially rogue members of council as well. So if you're in it for the right reasons, and that's why we put these sessions on, if you're in it for the right reasons, go for it. If you truly believe that you're the best person for the job, can well represent your community, believe it's a calling rather than a job, absolutely. If on the other hand, that you just want to be the boss and tell me what to do, that doesn't resonate with me. And I think that, I hope that other than if you ignore populism for a moment, which is a big thing to ignore, I understand, but if you ignore populism and you start to look at substance, mm-hmm, we will stop electing people who are promising short-term gain for long-term pain. And the people I want are the people who are looking at the best interests of my community, that generation into advance, recognizing that there may be some short-term pain. We've got things like COVID. We've got things like an oil price crash. We're in a global in a global environment that we have to adapt to. And thinking about tomorrow or next week or even next year isn't good enough.
Yeah, I love the way that you frame that it's the person's principles that you're voting for, that you're electing them based on their principles. So as the issues change, you have confidence that they're going to make their decisions based on that core set of principles and ethics or ethos that align with yours and with community good. And
I had conversations with my own local elected official, because I obviously live in a constituency as well, about I want to vote for someone who's going to make decisions on issues that I have no idea or even hear yet.
Yeah.
The people who were elected here in Alberta in 2017 didn't know anything about COVID and are having to deal with it. Some are dealing with it really well. Some are dealing with it really poorly. But if I'm electing somebody based on the values, ethics, principles, aptitudes, and not just what the hot button issue of the day is, like Calgary mayor's our candidates are busy commenting on a zoning issue involving a Dairy Queen. Who cares, right? In the long run, it's something that people can grab onto because they understand it.
Yeah.
But it's in the big picture, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah. A slight aside, have you ever considered running for elected official or political office of any kind?
I consider it all the time.
Yeah.
But a lot of people tell me my skin's too thin. I take criticism too personally. I have actually run before. I ran for local office. Maybe that's why I'm an author now. Those who do, those who can't write books about it. I don't know. I ran in a 3-person race in an open ward. I won just over 40% of the vote, and I still managed to lose. So, and I've helped a lot of people since then and advised even more. And this is kind of my niche. I really enjoy it.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, for my own municipality, I'm a bit of a pariah, I think, because I had too many opinions. The same things that I would express around the province or around the country, I express locally, and they're seen as a personal affront rather than one based on values and principles.
Yeah.
I was presenting at a conference in Virginia just before the pandemic hit, and I was introduced as an expert because I had a briefcase in 500 miles.
Yeah. When I was a consulting landscape architect, and I lived in a small town, but I would go to Toronto or Ottawa or Kingston or Peterborough and be an expert there.
Yeah.
Came back to my hometown. No, we need someone from Toronto.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
Well,
or somewhere from not here.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody from not here. Yeah, that's awesome. Are there any other big challenges that you're tackling right now, or fun projects on your horizon that you'd like to share with us?
We work in cycle with election cycles, and they're different throughout the country. They're almost all 4 years. So before elections, before nomination day, we're doing these candidate orientations. Then we move into council orientations, and then we move into strategic planning, and that's the cyclical stuff. Sometimes we're also called in to help with bylaws and policy. Sometimes either writing or rewriting. We're called in to help with if one councillor has complained formally against another. Sometime with those.
Yeah.
We had a really interesting project last year with the Government of Northwest Territories. A lot of the hamlets in the north are very small and don't have the internal expertise to do a lot of the legislative machinations. So we were asked to almost do a choose your own adventure on bylaws. So we created a procurement bylaw template and a meeting procedure bylaw template and a workbook that went with them, so that we could hand it over to a municipality, to a council, and say, if you look at procurement, what are your procurement levels for your, they call them senior administrative officers or SAOs. So what are your SAO limits? What are your council requirement limits? What are your director limits? Do you have any sort of an incentive for local business? Those kind of things that were questions of council, so that they could turn this choose your own adventure into their true adventure. And I really found that quite empowering, that we were helping them be the best that they could be. And that's pretty cool.
That's interesting. So you kind of gamified the framing, or the definition of their procedures, policies. You gamified it, and they could kind of pick and choose.
Yeah, essentially, they could use what was best for their community.
And the other powerful thing about that is that you're asking them the question, and they're answering it. You're not telling them what the best way is.
No, and historically, understand, I may be wrong on this, but my understanding is they would take the next hamlets over policy, change the title and the name, and adopt it. And I can understand why, because they've got so much other stuff they've got to do. They don't have the expertise necessarily to realize the unintended consequences of doing that. We were pointing those consequences out. And if they wanted to do that, they were fine to do it, as long as they did it as an informed decision rather than as an uninformed decision. Yeah.
What about as an author, Ian? Is there a sequel, a prequel, another book in the works?
Who's Driving the Grader will be followed by Who's Driving the Dump Truck, maybe. I don't know. Actually, the short answer is yes. I am kind of noodling around another one. I have written 25 commandments. I don't know. That the 25 aptitudes that I see in a really good chief elected official.
A mayor.
And started fleshing that out. I've had some conversations with municipal world, but certainly no commitments on that.
Yeah.
And so that may or may not come to pass, but I never thought I'd write a first book until I got stranded in Rankin.
Yeah.
Now I'm on to the second. So
well, Jasper.
Or Jasper. So they're all of us.
It's going to be the Jasper agenda.
Yeah, I could quite do. One of my friends and colleagues is a fellow by the name of George Cuff, who you've interviewed. And I think most people across Canada know. Yeah. And he and I joke from time to time that I'm trying to catch up to him in number of books, but he seems to write 2 for my every one. Yeah. And it's never going to happen. So,
well, he's now into the children's books too. With Tucker Goes to the Hall. Yeah.
And then there's another fellow who lives close by here, a fellow by the name of Doug Griffiths, who you might want to interview, who wrote a book called 13 Ways to Kill Your Community.
Oh, no.
He's actually, it's really well done. Okay. He's a former Alberta deputy premier. He's about my age and has talked a lot about community building, community development. Wow. And it's fascinating. There's another fellow by the name of Mark Anielski who has written a couple of books on well-being. And we're starting to see that kind of be the ultimate expression of municipal success. Why do people move to a community? Why do they stay there? And Mark's written a book called The Economics of Happiness and another one called An Economy of Well-Being. He talks about, he and I work together on a couple of these projects, talk about how you measure well-being in a community. Because it's not just dollars and cents. It's the sidewalk or the trail, the path is more than just the cost of putting it in and maintaining it. It's also a value as a community connector, as a way to promote health. I mean, all those sorts of things that are intangible, but you can still look at them as a local asset.
Yeah, that's when I picked the name for my initiative here, Thriving Mayor, I was reading the book Thrive by Arianna Huffington.
Right.
And she defines, right, so far in the past, we've been defining success by power and wealth. Mm-hmm. And she said, well, we need a third metric. And that's the one that measures how we're thriving: wisdom, wonder, and well-being. And I love that to thrive. And it's like a community too: the cultural attributes, the recreational resort, the natural, the ecology, the work and all of the services and all those other things. But it's kind of the softer, the well-being part that's so incredibly important.
Our definitions of community has changed substantially too. If you look at it 50 or 100 years ago, community with a large C was me and my neighbors. We had different interests potentially, but we lived in close proximity to one another. We'd meet each other at the grocery store, maybe a church or a temple or something, or school. The definition of community now is more interest-based. That it's a community of people who are interested in local government. It's a community of people who are interested in knitting or book clubs or sport. And they're not necessarily geographically proximal. Yeah. It's useful if they're in the same time zone, but they don't have to be. So the purpose of local governments, those sort of corporations, have changed as well. That we're not just serving the people who live next door to one another because they need their garbage picked up. Now we're also looking at what do we attract in terms of communities of interest? What are we known as a community? And it's not.
Yeah. You're the only other person I've ever heard use the word proximal.
Oh, yeah. I'm an author, don't you know?
I love that word.
I'm also an immigrant, which is maybe where my humor comes from.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, me too. So I'm just going to put up this banner, Ian. This is where people can go to buy your book. Highly recommended. It's a great read. It's super informative, and then the questions at the back at the end of every chapter are also super, super helpful.
Great.
So, Ian, what I'd like to do to close out our episode, which has been great, is ask you to share a chapter 22, which is the last chapter in your book, and it's entitled "Closing on a Positive Tone."
Okay. So I'm going to read just a couple of paragraphs, if that's okay, and
sure.
We can all curl up on the couch and listen and get hot chocolate, and away we go. It's a little early for that, maybe. So changing that tone, that negative tone potentially, is one of the first steps to changing the culture of an organization. While I write specifically about local government, there's undoubtedly a tone and therefore a culture in any organization that involves more than one person working together. I am honored to be able to work with so many great people who are involved in local government, some of them elected and some of them appointed. What has appeared in these pages is really a summation of what these amazing people have taught me and I've had the ability to synthesize over the years. So I kind of gave away the ending. I'm not really sure I should have done that, but it's not quite the ending, but it's past the climax anyway.
Yeah, no, it's a really wonderful read. Thank you so much, Ian. Really appreciate our time together. A great book, and really super looking forward to your next one. And stay connected. And please stay on after we end the broadcast. And I'd like to get some more of those mayors' names for potential guests on the show. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. Please be here next week when we have the president of Durham College in Oshawa, Don Leviza, on, who's going to talk to us about innovation in sustainable urban agriculture. And Durham College just received a $5 million donation from the Barrett family. And urban agriculture, sustainability, the ecology are near and dear to my heart. And I'm the head coach of the men's volleyball team at Durham College. So I'm looking forward to talking to my president as well as about urban agriculture. So thanks again, everybody. Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next week. Thank you very much, Ian.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for joining the Thriving Mayor Show. Make sure to like and share and tell your friends and colleagues. Mayors are awesome and are the change agents to enhance the quality of living for over 80% of us. Remember what Coach Wooden said, you cannot live a perfect day without doing something for someone who can never repay you. Much love and peace. Until next time.